We'll give another couple minutes and then we'll get started. So while we're waiting, if you have not used WebEx before, in WebEx there's a view drop-down menu where you can make it full screen on your side. The other option is if you're looking in your frame, there's up in the upper right-hand corner, there's an up arrow and a down arrow. There's one that's pointing to the upper right. You can click that and it'll also make it full screen as well. All right, well, we're going to go ahead and get started here just so we can stay on time, and for those that only have an hour here. So today we are going to be covering some of the hardware and installation things. So we do these training sessions or workshops once a month, and we have different topics. And so this month, February, we're covering some of the hardware options and installation processes, and so I'll be going through that today. So the agenda that we'll be covering is just give you an overview of some of the LEGO devices and installation, cover some of the various hardware types from the GPS to the cables to sensors to other sort of devices such as tablets, phones, and other things like that we can work with. I'll provide an overview of some of the LEGO hardware that we use, and we can cover that in more detail, and then go through the capabilities of those types of hardware. So just based on the hardware, there's different capabilities. And then we'll cover some of just some things to consider as you're working with your hardware or lessons learned, and then just end in questions and answers at the end. So basically sometimes when we're talking to customers, they think there's only one GPS device, and they try to maybe think about that device and use it. But the reality is that these GPS devices, they don't fit every type of equipment that's out there. There's different types, and you have to get the right equipment for the right types of vehicles and the right types of functionality that you're wanting to accomplish in the end. And so this is an example here. Both of these vehicles are obviously white, but there's a big difference in the type of vehicle. So, you have a standard F-150 pickup on the top, and then down below you have a paint striper and multiple cabs. Especially if you're looking at wanting to capture information about what the vehicle is doing, such as when you're actually spraying or the types of spray you're spraying. There's a very big difference in those types of functions, and knowing that and knowing that beforehand is an important piece to determine and pick the right equipment for your uses in your vehicles. So that really leads into some of the key questions that we ask right at the beginning in a project. One is the equipment and vehicle information. So we typically provide a vehicle information sheet. It's a template, and the reason why we do that is we need information about your vehicle. So things such as model, make. So there's a big difference between, say, what a Prius model, a Toyota Prius, versus, say, a Ford F-150, partly because some of the things that are on that equipment work differently, and that you still may need different types of equipment based on the make and model. Also, year makes a difference. So the year of that vehicle, so if you have a vehicle that's older than 1996, those don't have the OBD2 ports. There's a little bit different configuration there, so that requires a different hardware for the age of the vehicle. Other things on the equipment is things such as knowing whether or not you're going to be doing things outside of the cab or inside of the cab, and how many cabs. So going back to that picture before where you saw there's actually a cab in the front and back, makes a big difference as well. And then also questions such as, does the equipment have power? Does it have, is it a vehicle that has battery, or is it actually a trailer that and you can track things that don't have power but can use a battery. So there's devices out there that can run off of a battery rather than connecting to power, are some examples of equipment information. The other thing is functional information. So things that are important to know are things like, you know, what are your goals of this? In other words, are you just wanting to basically know real-time where the vehicles are right now, or are you wanting to do more? Is your goal to be able to track when they're actually putting the broom down, or when they're putting the plow down, when the arm's going out, you know, that sort of. So what's the goal? Is it reporting? And so the more information we have on the functional side of things, we have a better idea of the equipment to use as well. How many inputs are needed? So again, looking at equipment such as a street sweeper or a plow, or going back to that paint striper, that could be numerous inputs, and you add on there things such as you want to also track the driver, is important information for us to know, because it requires potentially a different device and as well as different harnesses to capture the number of inputs that you're wanting to capture. So, and then things like engine diagnostics. If you want engine diagnostics, it's going to be perhaps a different device than if you don't. If you want driver ID, or you want to know who's driving the vehicle, is also potentially I mean, it could be that some of these could be the same device, but we just need to know, if you want to be able to know who's driving that vehicle, then that's going to sort of narrow down which device and cables that we provide you in the end. And then also, is your staff going to be installing it, or do you want us to install it, or a contractor to install it, are important things to know as well in the process. So just again, key questions that are important for us to know in the process. There's various hardware types out there. So obviously the key one that you're probably familiar with is obviously the GPS device itself. So there's GPS devices that can go into the equipment, the vehicle, but there's also other types where, as I mentioned, an asset tracker, where you want to track something that's not necessarily a vehicle, but something else, such as a trailer or something else that you want to know if it gets taken, where it is. And beyond that, you may want to be able to do advanced things, such as within the vehicle have a Wi-Fi hotspot. So there's equipment, there's devices out there that can be both a Wi-Fi hotspot as well as a tracker, so that if you have, say, a laptop in your vehicle or a tablet and you want to connect up into your network, as well as tracking, there's those capabilities. We're going to be going into a lot more on the harnesses and cables, but there's many options there. And again, it sort of depends on number of inputs and what your goals are in terms of the cables or harnesses that we provide for you. Also, there's the driver ID button. The driver ID identifies the driver that's in the vehicle. that's one that we can provide. There's also HID reader option. It's very similar to the driver ID button. The one difference is that you can use your employee badge HID. A lot of cities or counties or organizations already have a security system where they're using HID employee badges. Well, we can leverage that and then essentially put in an HID reader that can identify the driver based on that as well. There's buzzers, so similar to keeping your door ajar or not putting your seatbelt on, it can buzz until you actually scan the badge or touch the driver ID options there. And then on the devices, mobile devices, so Garmin is one that we resell as a option for doing routing, and it's more of an end user device with an interface that can be used for obviously receiving jobs and turn-by-turn directions, routing, those sort of things, chatting and those sort of options. The other option is if you have a smartphone or tablet, being able to track those as well, and again, receive jobs in turn-by-turn directions. We can connect with those. And then also sensors. So there's various sensors depending on what you're wanting to capture. Those could be proximity sensors. They could be different types of sensors that we can connect to and, again, be able to know when the vehicle is in operation at different parts of the vehicle as well. So just to provide an overview of the LEGO hardware that we provide, our primary devices that most of our customers use are the LMU, our CalAmp. So the CalAmp devices, it's an American company here, and the LMU 3030 device is one of our typical devices that we use. It's plugged into an OBD2 port within the vehicle. And the other primary device that we use is the LMU 2630. So that's more of a wired device, and we'll be covering these in more detail in the upcoming slides. Some of the specialized devices that we also can provide are the LMU 4230. That's where you're perhaps working with the J-Pod, and you're also wanting quite a few inputs. The 4230 is an option as a more advanced specialized device. The other one is the LMU 5530, which can be the Wi-Fi hotspot and a tracker as well. And so that's another option, and they sort of scale up in terms of the number of cables that you use and the complexity of the installation as you go into these specialized devices. And then the other two that I'm showing down here are the asset tracker device. TTU 2830 is a tracker that can be connected up to a trailer, for example, a smaller trailer. And then the one on the right, the white one, is even a larger. It's actually a very large one that you can bolt in. It's got a 7-year battery built into it for tracking, and it's perhaps maybe with larger equipment that you want to bolt in, things such as a freight car or something along those lines, permanently. But those devices are about a foot long, so they're pretty big, whereas this other one's a little bit smaller. Some of the accessories that go with these devices that are available, with the 3030 that I mentioned, again, it goes into the OBD port. You may want to essentially hide that or put it under the dash so it's not sticking out of the OBD port. There's two options here. One is a splitter cable, which is on the left, which you can essentially keep the OBD port open, and then you can tie it underneath the dash. The other one is just an extended cable where you plug one end into the OBD port and then you tie it up underneath the dash as well. Uh, the other one is the standard harness for the 2630. The two standard harnesses are, the one on the left is if you're wanting to do basic just tracking and you want to wire it in permanently. So the standard wires there are red, white, and black. Black for ground, white for the ignition, and then red for power. So those are sort of permanently wired under the dash. The other one that's typically used is the one on the right. It has those the white, black, and red, but it also has additional input options. So, for example, the orange and blue could be connected to street sweeping, your brooms, to know when the broom is up and down, et cetera. So those are the primary harnesses that we provide with those devices. So again, some of the other devices that we can provide is Garmin 660. It's a fleet for the end user to actually be able to receive jobs, routing, those sort of capabilities, as well as tracking. It can be used for a tracking device as well as tablet. So this is a Samsung tablet as an example where, again, those sort of devices, if you're wanting to do things such as pre and post inspections, you're wanting to use a tablet and the end user has something that they're using, can also be from the driver's standpoint as a tool that's used with LEGO as well. Just some other things that we've worked with for user identification or driver identification. There's two real key options. One is NFC capable driver ID and iButton. So we can, a number of our customers are using this where they essentially have a iButton in the cab, and then each driver is assigned a iButton, and we provide those, and that identifies the driver. And so, for example, one of our customers, Sound Transit, they have 50 vehicles, but about 200 employees they're essentially, the vehicles are in a carpool. And so all those drivers are assigned to one of these iButtons or key fobs, and they then, when they use the vehicle, they check in, and that way you can get reports based on the driver as well as the vehicle. Below that, you can see there's a buzzer. So the buzzer can also be used to ensure that the driver actually touches the driver ID, and it just buzzes until they touch it, and then that buzzer goes off. Again, another option that I talked about earlier is the employee badge. So a lot of agencies already have these employee badges that they are used to using. They go in and out of buildings. Well, we can incorporate that in with the vehicle, so they have their employee badge. They just touch that reader, and then it identifies that driver based on that HID reader. So different capabilities between hardware. So I'm going to go into and talk a little bit about some scenarios, different scenarios that you may have, and just the considerations of hardware. So, some of the basics that a lot of customers have, they have standard vehicles. They're typically newer than 1996, such as that F-150, and I just want to be able to install it myself and plug and play. So again, this 3030, LMU 3030, is a typical device that a lot of our customers are using. Connects up to the engine. The engine diagnostics has things such as device unplug notifications, and it's a pretty typical device that's used out there. The way to do that is it's really simple. It's essentially locate the OBD port underneath the dash. Looks something like this in the middle here. You just look at the end of the unit there. It just plugs in and off you're going. Essentially, as soon as you plug that in, connect it up to LEGO, and it starts collecting information immediately once it's plugged in. You can do some other things. Some of our customers, we can put in a zip tie on there and put some material basically on there to know that it's been tampered with. We do have, as I mentioned, device unplug notification. So if it does, it's running on a battery. So if it gets unplugged, it can send a notification to the supervisor that it's been unplugged or tampered with. So that's again a standard basic unit that's used quite frequently. Again, this is going through some of the steps here of how we can put a splitter cable in. So if you're wanting to keep that OBD port open and just sort of keep it away from the driver, you can essentially locate the OBD port on the left here, and it's pretty straightforward. Just take that, you remove the existing hardware here, and then you just plug one end of the splitter into that existing end. And then if you notice down here below, you have the other end with the ODB device, the 3030 device, plugged into that end. And then you just mount there's a port there that you mount that's available that keeps the OBD port open. And then essentially just tuck all the cables underneath behind, and again, it looks like the same OBD port that's available in the vehicle, and you can continue to use that, and that's one way to use this device or keep it hidden, I guess. Another scenario would be, say, a street sweeper or snow plow, and you may need help with this sort of installation where you're wiring this device in. So I'm sort of pointing out here the key wires. The red wire is the power, white ignition, ground black here. So those are the core wires. But then you have additional wires. So typically our customers will use the orange wire on the top here for the right broom, and then there's a blue wire down below, which is on the left broom. And so you can identify when the brooms are down, up and down, based on those connections. So this is just going through, for example, wiring up a street sweeper. You have, you locate the hardwire red to the 12-volt constant, the white 12-volt ignition, and then black to the chassis ground with typically use an I-ring on that. And then, of course, looking for your inputs, you in the middle here, you might have a variety of inputs, and you just need to obviously connect to the right input for which broom you're connecting up to. And typically, a lot of times we test this out on our side. So you bring the broom down, and we can see on our side in LEGO when which broom is up or down. And then again, we can capture that information both on the map, the historical track, so you can see where the broom is down, where the plow is down, as well as have those reports. So, and then of course, just tucking it back in and securing the console is an important part. But so that's just to give you an idea of sort of what it looks like to install some of that, for example, for a street sweeper. Another scenario, which I've talked a little bit about, but is this driver ID or HID, knowing the driver of the vehicle. So again, the key device here would be a 2630 is a typical one for doing that. The nice thing about this harness that we provide, it already has built-in connectors with it. So they just snap right on there. For example, with the buzzer, there's a 3-pin connector. You just connect the buzzer to the 3-pin, and then the I button is a 2-pin connector. You just connect that, and then it's just a matter of really securing those where you need it in the vehicle, and then just doing the other wiring like you normally would, the red, the black, and the white in the vehicle. But then again, you have that information, and it's ready to go for using it. So those are pretty easy to do because the basically those connectors are already on the harnesses that we deliver. So here's just showing you an example of a driver ID with the I button. So many times there might be a plug already in your type of vehicle that you can open the hole and plug and stick the reader out of, or sometimes you can drill a hole out in your dash, depending on how you want to go with that. And just shows a little ID reader here, and then the key fob or I button. Usually what we do is we have an ID that's associated with that. We stick that on there. It's a number. So there's an associated number in LEGO, but then on your side, what you're actually seeing is the driver name. So with that ID, there's a driver name that's tied to that I button. So when they touch it, it sees next to the vehicle, you can see who's actually driving it based on that. And then they just touch the reader there. The other that I talked about is the HID reader, and so that's if you have, again, the existing employee badge that you're working with, and you're just wanting to capture, so we can provide an HID reader which can be installed in the vehicle. You can see it's in different places depending on where you need to have it, either on the console here or next to this, underneath this. So again, it sort of depends on where you want it, but here's different options of customers that we've worked with. And then we get into this one. So this was our sort of our starting slide here of going from the Ford F-150 to this paint striper. So as you can see, once you get into these sort of vehicles or equipment, it's a whole nother ballgame here, because you're talking about you know, up front you have a cab up front. You also have a cab in back. It's quite a distance from where you're talking about up here, where you're starting the vehicle and ignition, bringing wire back here potentially to connect up with. In some cases, you have multiple things that are going on back here, especially with paint striping, where you have you know, white and different colors that you're dealing with. Wiring. So you may, and again, also the other thing is potentially working with things such as a J-Pod connector or J1939. Oh, I accidentally clicked that. Is obviously adds a little bit more complexity. So we have a device, again, it's the LMU4230 device, which gives a lot more input options as a potential. This device is a little bit more expensive with the device and cables, but it does provide a little bit more input. So most vehicles don't require this level of complexity. So I mean, the 2630 covers the majority of things such as sweeping. You usually only need about 3 inputs or so. It's usually maybe right broom, left broom, and center broom, or potentially maybe you have a spreader and a plow. So usually it's you know, 2 to 3 inputs. But if you need additional, this is a device that may work for if you're talking quite a few inputs. So just to give you an idea of, and obviously this sort of installation is going to be closer to 6 hours. 6 to 8 hours maybe, whereas going back to that LMU 3030 takes 5 minutes or less. So there's a real range of, that's why we ask those questions at the beginning. What type of vehicle is it? What, you know, all that information, because that obviously impacts, one, the equipment you're using, the type of device, cables, the harnesses that we need, also installation time, and the amount of time that it's going to take to do the installation, just from a standpoint of you know, the wiring and that sort of thing. So, and we've pretty much done the gamut in terms of working with different vehicles, and so we can, you know, if you have questions about some of those things, we can talk about that here at the end. So, just in terms of what to consider when looking at GPS and looking at these, you know, which units or which equipment to use, and just lessons learned. So, you know, spending the time up front to know the equipment and know the vehicle. That's why we ask the questions. That's why we send the vehicle information list, is to get an understanding of what the vehicles are. Again, make, model, year, and additional things such as the inputs. Also identifying the goals up front. What's your end goal? Goals? Are you, on your reports, are you wanting to know when the broom, you know, right broom, left broom, or is it just anytime the broom is down? Or, you know, I need to know the driver. Eventually down the road, I want to know who's driving it. So knowing that up front gets the right equipment. Just, you know, when you're implementing a large deployment, things that we've done with our customers is coming up with an installation schedule, and knowing the vehicle types and knowing the goals can help that schedule and getting. And some customers we've worked with, they can only do the installation in the evenings or weekends. Their vehicles are going all the time. They don't have time to bring them in. So that obviously impacts, you know, someone that's going to be doing the installation. If they have start at 5 p.m. and they got to work till 10 p.m. at night or something, that's obviously an important thing to know in terms of when the vehicles are available to install and how many. And just one is a buzzer or no buzzer. So just from the lessons learned, one of our customers, they wanted to implement the driver ID technology, and so we did that, but then we quickly found out that we were seeing that the drivers were not actually using the driver ID, and that's because there was nothing that was telling them that a buzzer, essentially. So once we implemented the buzzer, we saw every time that basically the reports were always good because they always had to touch the buzzer to use the driver ID. So just things like that to consider. A buzzer is useful because it does sort of enforce, if you're wanting to know, you know, who's driving it, and you sort of have to do something to enforce it at some level. Some other things in terms of just lessons learned is from our, you know, troubleshooting devices. You're working with a technology. There's obviously GPS, so you're working with satellites. You're working with cables. You're working with in some cases an OBD port. You may be working with an older vehicle. Things such as, just on the troubleshooting side, we found in some cases the fuse go out in OBD. So the place where the OBD port goes out, the actual fuse in the vehicle goes out. So there's little things like knowing on the device, there's lights on the device. So a couple of the key lights are, there's a green light and there's an amber orange light. And the green light essentially identifies what the GPS is doing. So if it's a solid green, that means you're connected to GPS and it's locating. If it's flashing, that means it's looking. So in other words, if the vehicle's in a garage underneath, or in a parking garage or something, it may not be connecting to GPS yet until they actually pull the vehicle out of the garage, and then that light's going to turn green. The other thing is that the amber light is associated with the network. So is it connecting? Is it connected to the network? So that's a thing to look at initially when you're installing. Is that amber light solid? Solid means it's connecting through our Verizon network. That's part of our solution. If it's not, then that's, if you're calling in for our support, those are key things to just tell us that, oh, the lights on the side are flashing and this one's doing this. So that's something that's helpful. Another key thing that is just, if you're having an issue or it's not showing, is just pull it out, put it in another vehicle. Does that work in another vehicle? If it does, that sometimes leads to, well, maybe there's something with that other vehicle that's going on. So again, that's happened before with where we found that a fuse was burned out in the other vehicle on that, and then you just need to replace the fuse, for example. So those are just some things that we've run across that are helpful to know as you're looking at devices. And just some additional recommendations here that are sort of standards is that if you're working with, for example, the 2630 or 4200s where it's a wired device, and it's a specific kind where you're maybe connecting to fuses, is to use a fuse tap as an option. That's just one recommended best practice. The other thing is to use terminal rings for grounding. So you're connecting the ground, use a terminal ring there as well. And so those are just some additional recommendations on hardware. So I want to open it up for questions. This is not normally a lot of times we get into LEGO itself, but this one is more of covering the hardware and some of the installation things that we're doing. So it's a little bit different than some of the workshops we've done in the past. But does anyone have any questions about the different hardwares? And you can also ask me questions about what the results are of some of those if you want as well. Questions, anyone? No questions? All right. Well, that's the workshop today. It was on hardware, the different options. Again, our plan is to do different workshops every month. So we will have another workshop next month on something probably completely different, maybe on reporting. If you have any specific training workshop ideas that you want us to cover, we'd be happy to cover those. But just be on the lookout for a training workshop in the near future here. No questions? All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us for the hardware and installation training workshop today. Goodbye.